Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to take a call on this bill. And I would like to congratulate the Chair of the Primary Production Select Committee, who's just taken his seat, for finally getting some work to do. I think it's an indictment on this government, actually, that this is the first piece of legislation that we've seen in this term of Parliament in this space. This is, of course, from a party in government who purports to be the party of farmers, is finally taking its first piece of legislation to the Primary Production Select Committee. So I'd like to congratulate that Chair for finally getting some work through his committee and seeing some legislation. Maybe you could speak to the Leader of the House about upping the work rate of the legislative program in your area. A suggestion, not your area, Mr. Chairman, to that member's area. Now, as my colleague Meka Whaitiri outlined very clearly, that Labour's position is that we are supporting this bill to Select Committee. One, because we'd like to see the Select Committee do some work, but secondly, because we actually think there's a really important function that has to occur here in terms of the submission process. There are clearly some very important questions that need to be addressed in the process of the Select Committee's examination of this legislation. So we've had a good outline from speakers who have spoken about the function of this bill, around innovative and non-innovative products, about extending time periods and the balance that needs to be drawn between providing protection and incentive to innovate for agri-chemical companies and the need to maintain competitiveness and not price some of these out of the market of farmers. And Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about here is the kinds of evidence that is required when protection is sought, the kind of evidence that need to be filed. And this is always a balance for any company who is innovating, whether it be a patent, whether it be a plant variety right, that there is a level of detail that needs to be filed, that this person who is doing the filing has to have confidence that they can still protect their advantage and their investment through the fact that they can get there is a strong business case for them to do this. So this is always vitally important, and we know that in New Zealand's agribusiness industry that having the ability to protect our IP that we invest in, again whether that be through plant variety rights or whether it be through bringing in new uses or new products that can be used in our agricultural sector, is vitally important. And I think there's been some very good commentary around the bill. And one of the issues is around new uses. And I think the previous speaker talked about this, that sometimes it can be that a particular product, that an innovative use for that product has come up with. But because it crosses over, whether it's in the human consumption chain or whether it's in the animal consumption chain, the kinds of regulation around how you use it and the use differs, and there are different regulatory standards that need to be met, and the kinds of testing and the evidence around new use that needs to be submitted, I think is a very important question, and one the Select Committee will need to spend some time. And a very good example around this was provided by Mark Ross, the Chief Executive of AgCram, who used the example of fodder beet plantings that grew from virtually nothing to around 50,000 hectares last year. And this fodder beet was classified as a different crop to fodder brassica that had been the traditional use of this. And companies needed to do more efficacy and residue trials to register products for fodder beet. And this cost more than $100,000 a product because this was a new use in a fodder beet rather than a fodder brassica. Now, fodder beet growers need chemicals to be registered for fodder beet. That just makes sense. Otherwise, they face having to use products registered for forage brassicas off-label. And this raises real risks around crop residues and residues in meat or milk, and real questions that do need to be addressed and examined. But the cost of this, so if you ever look at a reformulation, it might cost $300,000 to reformulate a product for a new use, but it may cost $500,000 for the efficacy trials around getting the evidence required for filing. So these are all important questions that are going to have to be considered by the Select Committee when it comes to it. And Mr Speaker, my colleague Mika Whaitiri spoke in her contribution about the very low number of submissions that had been included to date in the prelim work that had led up to this legislation coming to the floor of this House. And Mr Speaker, I would like to see a greater number of submitters. I'd like to hear from a greater number of research organisations in our agribusiness sector to find out where the balance for them as researchers who are looking for the development of innovative products, where that lies. Does it lie in allowing farmers access to off-protection, moderately priced farm products? Or does the advantage lie in us having the ability to protect that for longer? What is best in terms of our ability to innovate in the agribusiness sector? And I think this is a very important consideration that the committee will need to have when it comes to consider this. I think that one of the other questions that I would like the committee to explore is, of course, the interface with the HASNO Act and how it is. I think any time that we're looking at consequential amendments to the HASNO Act, we do need to proceed with caution, and we do need to ensure that the protections that we need are indeed in place, and that we're not either inadvertently or by design opening the door for consequential amendments of things that really might not be desirable to New Zealand. So I think real questions any time, and I do note that in this legislation, Mr Speaker, there are going to be consequential amendments to that Act. And I think that one of the key questions that has been raised is some of the submissions that have already been heard to date, where federated farmers brought out very much about this increasing monopoly time period and the offset with the access to these chemicals, and how it is that not only we cannot just say that that consulting with the agribusiness sector is around consulting with the agri-chemical sector. It needs to be across the supply chain, it needs to be across the sector, and it needs to understand the different parts of it, because of course there's going to be people that benefit from these changes, people that will do very well because they will get extra periods of monopoly granted under this legislation, but what is the cost of that? And that is all considerations that do need to be considered. But I think that there are important considerations and questions we do need to ask. I, for one, am very interested in the question around new use and the innovation that we can do as a country, both to combat some of our greatest environmental problems and the way in which we can use existing products potentially for new use. For example, what products are already on the market that could be used to reduce nitrate runoff, and that we could actually see an improvement in our waterways? Or what products are already there in a similar vein, if you're doing stuff to mitigate the nitrate runoff, might actually have the added benefit of decreasing nitrous oxide and therefore decreasing our contribution to greenhouse gases. So I think, given the amount of emphasis that New Zealand has to, by design, put into considering how it is that research and development is going to help our way out of 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions as a nation, that we do need to make sure that we've got a regulatory regime that makes it possible for us to innovate. We need to be able to innovate right across our agribusiness sector, but we also have to always be working to ensure that we have the right protections in place, that we have the right protections in place for our environment, that we have the right protection in place for the rest of the sector, that this isn't about the unnecessary gifting of a monopoly to only part of a supply chain who will benefit. We have to ensure that we do have those right across the way. So, Mr Speaker, I think the Select Committee has a hard job ahead of it, and a lot of work to do in terms of making sure that we do have these questions adequately answered. A job I am sure they are looking forward to and relishing with their first piece of legislation this term of Parliament. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Members, order. Members, this debate is interrupted and set down for resumption next sitting day, and the House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Good evening.